Let's call this June 9th regular meeting of the Calaveras County Planning Commission to order and get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any staff announcements or agenda changes?
Yes, we have agenda changes. So actually, I didn't look at the agenda, so I'm assuming it might be item number 2. Failing the zoning amendment, which item is that?
Number 2.
Okay, thank you. So that's going to actually be continued, well, not continued. We renoticed it for the next hearing. So I inadvertently had a little dyslexic moment, and I switched up some numbers in the APN, and unfortunately carried that error throughout the entire report. So luckily, we caught it before we came today. So we've gone ahead and already renoticed the hearing and changed all the errors, and so we'll bring that forward to you in the next meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Then we have nothing else. Then this is an opportunity for the general public to comment on any item that is within the subject matter of the Planning Commission, but not on our agenda today. Is there anyone here or online who would like to make a general comment? Nothing?
If you could raise your hands if you have a general comment. No comment at this time.
Not seeing anybody, we will go ahead and close that item and move on to the consent agenda, which consists of the approval of minutes from April 28th, 2022. Is there any member of the public or the commission who would like to remove that item for further discussion?
Nope.
Nope. Then we're open to a motion.
I move that we accept the meeting minutes of October 28th, 2022.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. Passes 4-0 with 1 commissioner position still vacant. Then our regular agenda, we'll get started with item 1, 2022-011, conditional use permit for Patricia and David Koolhoven. And Catherine.
Good morning. My name is Catherine Stephanie. I'm a planner 1 with the county, and I will be presenting project number 2022-001. The applicants are requesting a conditional use permit to operate a 1-bedroom bed and breakfast inn within their residence at 8345 Stevenson Street in McColmy Hill. APN 018-007-032 is a 0.16 acre parcel zoned R1-DR, which is single family residential with the design review combining district. It's designated by the general plan as having a historic center land use designation and is located within the McColmy Hill community plan area. A bed and breakfast, which is defined as a business which involves accommodations in 5 or fewer guest rooms, potentially with meals available, but limited exclusively for the guests of the inn, is a permitted use in the R1 zone with the approval and validation of a conditional use permit. The purpose of a CUP is to provide the general public with an opportunity to review a proposed land use that is generally consistent with the consistent with the purpose of a base zoning district, but has the potential to cause conflicts with neighboring land use and zoning. The design review combining district does not apply to this project as it regulates architectural design and aesthetics, not uses. The proposed use is compatible with the historic center land use designation. which is intended for a mix of residential and visitor-serving uses that preserve and protect the historic core of existing communities and includes residential, commercial, and public uses. The proposed use would occur within an existing residence located a block from a main commercial area in McColumney Hill, and the project is in compliance with the McColumney Hill Community Plan policies. The surrounding zoning and land uses consist of both single and multifamily residential, R1 and R3 zones, local commercial zones and uses, and public uses and services. The applicant has shown three parking spaces on their site plan, satisfying the parking code requirements of 1 parking space per unit and a minimum of 2 additional spaces for a bed and breakfast. The residence also has a 2-car garage, which satisfies the parking requirements for the R1 zone. The application was circulated to various county departments, local public agencies, and property owners within 300 feet for 30 days. Comments were received from the Environmental Management Agency and the Building Department. The Environmental Management Agency requested that water and wastewater services continue to be provided by public purveyors, and that the applicant receive a food facility permit prior to operation of the bed and breakfast. The building department conditioned the permit limiting the bed and breakfast to 5 or fewer rooms and requiring that the owner reside in the residence. The comments were incorporated into Resolution 2022-006 as conditions, and no comments were received from property owners. A notice of exemption from the California Environmental Quality Act report has been prepared and will be submitted for filing upon final approval of the permit. In conclusion, the project as proposed conforms to applicable goals and policies of the County General Plan and the McColumney Hill Community Plan, including General Plan Implementation Measure LU-5C, which encourages the expansion of home occupations and rural home businesses while minimizing the impact to neighbors. The project is found to be compatible with the surrounding land uses and zoning in the general vicinity, and there were no objections to the approval of the CUP from any landowner within 300 feet of the project location. The subject property is adequate in land area to accommodate the proposed use and was found to have safe and adequate access with no site improvements required beyond striping of parking spaces. This permit is conditioned for the protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. And staff recommends approval of conditional use permit 2022-011 to allow the operation of a 1-bedroom bed and breakfast inn at 8345 Stevenson Street in McColumney Hill, APN 018-007-032 in the R1-DR zone.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Catherine?
I'd just like to welcome you to our hearings, and thank you for the very complete report, and appreciate the fact you put in the thing about the double garage.
Yes.
So we know there's enough parking for everybody. Anyhow, thank you.
Yeah. I'm assuming you're the applicants? Is there anything you would like to add?
No, we just thank you all for.
Come on, walk up to it.
If you want to be in the resolution, you have to speak up another way.
We just thank you all for the consideration, and, this is kind of a first-time thing for us, and this is great, because we both just retired, and this is going to help us out in our retirement. So this is wonderful, and we're going to go full compliant, and we'll go ahead and get the business license, and we'll get moving along, and just thank you.
And I appreciate the fact that this isn't, the entire building's not becoming a bed and
Yes.
breakfast. No, this is great.
Yeah, that's it.
Does anybody have any questions? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
We're going to open the public comment portion of the hearing. Is there any member of our vast public who are here to witness this today, or any member online who would like to speak? Apparently, we have nobody online, and I don't see anyone in the audience, so we'll close the public comment portion of the hearing and bring it back to the commissioners. And are there any comments on this item or the resolution?
On the resolution, yes.
I figured. Would you like to get started?
Yes. Okay, on page 1, the last whereas clause has, again, it presented us with a double presented at the meeting. And so it should read, whereas during a notice public hearing on June 9, 2022, the Planning Commission considered all of the information presented to it, including a staff report comment and information presented by the project proponent. And strike the then presented at the meeting. On page 2, the top paragraph of evidence, and this is just grammar, last sentence, reads further review of the policies found that none specifically applies to this project. Apply should be applies, singular. And then on page 4, paragraph 4-3 at the top, includes a sentence, the plans must be approved prior to the issuance of a building permit, but I don't think any building permit is required. And therefore, that sentence should be stricken, if I'm correct.
Yes, so that comment was revised on May 25th, so I will be replacing that one with the correct comment that doesn't mention a building permit.
And that's all my comments.
Commissioner Laddish.
Not even a comma.
I don't have anything either. You've done a very complete review. Thank you. Would someone like to make the motion? Well, let's hear the recommendation.
Really quick, I do have one small change.
Sure.
This is Resolution 2022-006. At the bottom in the footer, I refer to it as 005, so I will be changing that, so it's correct. Are we ready for the recommendation now?
Yes, we
Okay.
are. Thank you.
Yes, staff recommends approval of conditional use permit 2022-011 to allow the operation of a one-bedroom bed and breakfast inn at 8345 Stevenson Street, McColney Hill, APN 018-007-032 in the R1/DR zone.
With the minor grammatical corrections.
Oh, I'm sorry, with the minor grammatical correction.
Thank you. And would someone like to make the motion?
I'll make the motion to approve it as amended.
I second it.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? None. Passes 4-0 with one vacant commissioner position. Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you. Yes. Good luck with your project.
Two.
And then
And there was gas.
then there was greenhouse gas.
You're just giving me so much room here.
How would we like to proceed with this item at this point?
Well, I'd suggest that we start with the chair's suggestions on the wildfire provisions. And I have a few questions for you.
Sure.
My understanding from what you said last time is that we would not keep any of the consultants' provisions, that this would be a substitute for their.
This is more comments to provide to them, for them to meld into the provisions. I was not,
I see.
and I did mostly address items that they had in there, within here, just rewording as we discussed or whatever.
So you're going to be sending them, or submitting a memo that has this in it with that as your.
Yes, or I will meld it into this and and put it in the format if that's what everybody feels is the right thing to do.
I think that would be very helpful. I think it's very important that we give the commissioner, the consultants, very specific suggestions, or we're going to end up with basically what we already have. So if you could do that, and I do have some question about some of your wording. On several, it says investigate the feasibility of obtaining funding. And I just wondered why you use that language instead of pursue funding, something like that.
Because in all cases, we don't know whether there's funding even available to pursue. So either one is fine with me. I don't feel strongly one way or the other.
Well, I think if you pursue funding and it's not available, you've done what you've asked. I would suggest you say that. And when we have one provision about halfway to several say continue to engage and cooperate, since we're supposed to be looking at additional measures that would reduce greenhouse gas, and I suggested even that the continue to be deleted.
So I think we need to acknowledge where it's already happening. Where we are, and that's primarily for our own purposes. That this is my reasoning for wording it that way, is that there was a lot of discussion among the commissioners about things we're already doing, and there's nothing more we can do. But I think we want to acknowledge that we already are doing something, but there's probably more that can be done with that relationship. That was my reasoning.
And maybe instead of continue, say augment engagement and cooperate or something like that, so that it is phrased in additional things we're going to be doing. I mean,
I can
whatever word.
work on that. Basically, it sounds like you're looking for stronger language.
Yeah, we are putting in actions that can be done that will do additional good.
Remembering that there is no calculation associated with this entire section.
I understand that. I would suggest that, like on your, about in the middle where you have investigate the feasibility of obtaining funding to partner with private groups and stuff, that you add a sentence along the lines of make a chipper machine and operator available to assist during private fuel reduction projects. It just, my experience is if you get a bunch of people out there and you're cutting limbs off trees and cleaning up property and stuff, you end up with burn piles. And that's not particularly helpful.
Right, so you want to be more specific about
Yeah.
what, or as an example?
That would be fine, yeah.
A chipper for borrowing?
It's available to assist during private fuel reduction projects, is what I would say.
I think that one's probably going to require some discussion. But let's not say it. You get through your list.
Then in my various suggestions, and since this is not, you've made it clear that this is not totally eclipsing what they're doing, I've suggested some additions to their wildfire provisions. One including adding the implementation measure S3S from the general plan. It's on page 26 of the general plan implementation program set, and that has to do with fuel management in new developments. It's something they didn't cover. And I made several other suggestions, which would be good. Anyhow,
I thought I picked up all the ones from the general plan, but
well,
I
you
might have
picked up
reworded
policies,
it.
but not the implementation maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, COS-2B and COS-2C are also,
You want those mentioned?
I-
Okay,
I-
I'll go through and find your comments and,
okay, thank you. But
What was the one you wanted to include?
the first one I mentioned was S3S, it's on page 26. It has to do with fuel management and new development.
so I'm wondering if you were looking for something more than what is required already in our codes and regulations, if you're looking for them to develop an ongoing fuel management plan.
Well, that provision talks about, yes, it was new developments, would be a,
But new developments already have the same requirements for fuel management at the time that they're built and approved. I'm wondering if you're looking for something for
well,
maintenance.
you know better than I whether that S3S is extraneous, but since it was
Yeah,
put
it's
in there as an implementation date,
It's already required.
it's already required, then forget it.
So, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But the issue of ongoing maintenance and new developments where parcels are sold and sometimes not built on for many years, it can be an issue. But that's an issue in our existing developments also, so. Okay.
Well, I have a few comments on this.
Sure.
First of all, I do think that the phraseology of investigate the feasibility, investigate the use of different things, it is appropriate when particularly you're talking about funding. We have no idea whether it's available. And that's the first step. That's what you do first. And the phraseology of continue to engage, I think, is accurate. And as being accurate, I think should be included. I did have some questions about some of the specific ones. Near the bottom of the first page, there's one that says, create a landscape ordinance that requires drought-tolerant and fire-resistant plantings within XX feet of structures. I don't know that that's in the general plan.
I don't know if it is in the general plan. It's something that I have I've been investigating what other places have done, and I've taken several online classes on this whole issue. And this was one of the things I was wondering about, and it is cropping up in other people's plans. I suspect that we are going to see a change in the requirements anyway that eliminates landscaping within 5 feet of the residence. That one's coming. I can see it in the air. But to me, it does make sense to use more fire-resistant plantings closer to the structures. I don't know if we have the expertise to do this here, where, we haven't managed to get our landscape ordinance, as Gina and I have discussed for about 20 years, really updated in the first place. So just another project for you guys.
And a question I
But
have
if we're
on
going to
that-
do a landscape ordinance and we're going to get it updated, why wouldn't we include some of those measures in there?
Are you talking about covering existing structures as well as new structures?
Never. We never go in and, we have no enforcement possible to go around and inspect every existing structure or if a person even undertakes a new landscaping project, we don't have that. My philosophical take on any of that is if we are unable to enforce an ordinance, we shouldn't create it.
So then, should we say within so many feet of new structures in that provision?
Sure.
I don't know if this is helpful, but I do know that the building department, when they get site plans for projects that would fit within the water efficient landscape rules of the state, do look to, that's basically for water efficiency. It's not necessarily fire efficiency, but there is actually.
There's a section in the Green Building Code, it is
Yes.
not enforced.
Oh,
I have never had the building department ask a single question about irrigation systems.
Oh.
But partially, that is because almost nobody submits landscaping as part of their building permit unless it's
Okay.
required, like on a commercial project where you have it and then it would get looked at. But those requirements are really for controllers on the irrigation system and have nothing to do with the plant materials.
Well, then how
There you
would
go,
this-
there's my over answer.
Well, then how would this be enforced if people don't submit landscape plans to the building department, and I can understand why they wouldn't, how would we enforce such a landscape ordinance?
Yeah, it would again only be part of whatever landscape ordinance we created, and so it would only happen when people are required to have a landscape plan.
Madam Chair, if I may chime in here. There are certain developments that are going to require submittal of landscape plans. And so, for example, a shopping center, some certain types of subdivision would require landscaping. But I think what is really most important here is that since we are in a fire-prone environment, the type of plant materials that we select have to reflect that. Most of the time, when we think about landscape plants, we think about drought-resistant plants because nobody wants you to plant a tree and then 3 months later, so we focus more on drought resistance rather than something that would withstand fire, if there's such a thing. But I'm glad you mentioned the fact that we don't have an updated landscaping plan, so that is something that we have to look at. And when we do that, we need to address more than just the drought-resistant issue. We have to understand that we're in a fire-prone environment, and we need to design our landscaping in such a way that we do not exacerbate a fire. When you have a wildfire, you have to have some kind of clearing around your residence so that you don't become consumed by the flames. So those are the kind of things that I think we're going to be looking at in the very near future.
Is that an answer? Is there something?
The simple answer is certain types of developments would require a landscape plan to be approved. Now, if you're doing a room addition and it goes to building for approval, that is not going to come with landscaping. But if you're building a shopping center, you're building single-family homes, you're designing a residential subdivision, mixed-use project, those kind of things would come with required landscaping and irrigation.
Well, I think this would just be fine-tuned to either only apply to discretionary developments or
Would only apply where our
new
landscape.
residential structures or whatever, but I think this is broad enough to cover whatever somebody wants it to cover down the road.
I think it just says when we develop our landscape ordinance, we take this into consideration.
Okay. Another one was, and actually it's the very next one, investigate additional protections of water rights to ensure sufficient water for firefighting. And as far as I know, the county as a county hasn't had anything to do with
No,
water rights.
but the county water district does. And even though they are not controlled by the county does engage with our water districts. So, I mean, we could change it to say, can continue to engage and cooperate with water districts to.
Well, I think the way you have it is broad enough to include that. And understanding that the county is not in the water rights business
Right.
itself,
Right.
whatever it can do to help CCWD or whoever, that's fine too. Okay.
I'm not even sure how much we can do, because I've been through this issue before. But I know that we need to keep an eye on our water rights. It's easy to lose them to more assertive urban areas.
And the last two would be on the second page, and they both have to do with adopting an ordinance that requires conformance with current WUI codes, Chapter 7A of the Building Code. When an X% of a structure or feature is modified, or an addition greater than X square feet or X% of existing structure is constructed. And this is not, it's not phrased as investigate the feasibility of doing this. This is saying adopt an ordinance that does this.
Because so there's, right now, these codes only apply to new construction, and they don't apply to additions to existing homes, and yet I see homes that are completely demolished and rebuilt. And because they weren't always, sometimes the plans that were submitted appear to be much more of a remodel, but they end up really taking the entire place down and rebuilding it. And I think this applies both to the wildfire issues and to energy. Energy has been pretty much taken care of by new codes, which requires even remodeling and additions to comply, just to a somewhat lesser degree. But on the wildfire thing, we're not going to improve our situation if we allow people to continue a risky condition into the future indefinitely. And so my point is, if you're doing a big addition or remodeling and replacing every window in your house and your siding, why shouldn't they have to comply?
And I'm assuming you're talking about current state WI codes.
Yeah, Chapter 7A of the Building Code.
And you might just insert state there, just to make it very clear. And we're not talking about our ordinance.
Of the California Building
I
Code.
understand, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I should have said that, because that's,
That pretty much explains it.
does that make sense?
And I think complying with state codes and keeping up to date with our compliance, the consultants indicated that that is an appropriate thing to be putting in here, that is action that we are taking, even though there are existing codes that we may not be in compliance with. So I would suggest that you do suggest that those be in this plan. And I don't have a strong feeling about the investigate the feasibility of. It just seems like extra wording to me, so.
I like extra words sometimes. Actually, I really don't. Commissioner Parker, come on.
You know, I just have, whenever we're gonna adopt an ordinance, I'm always trying to look out for people's bottom line. And what is the percentage? What is the percent, it says X percentage?
Yeah, something for discussion.
Okay, you know, for me, I'm fine, depending upon what X percentage turns out to
Well,
be.
you wouldn't make it 15,
Right.
and you wouldn't make it 90.
But it doesn't really say.
Well, that's because that's
So-
for us to discuss.
Exactly.
So,
The state codes don't specify a percentage.
the state code doesn't have this. They don't require anything
Okay.
to be done on
Okay.
a remodel or addition. Just like they don't require fire sprinklers to be added to an addition of any size.
So my question is, what are you proposing that the percentage be?
I developed this simply throwing everything I could think of in here for us to discuss. I would probably make that percentage something over 50%, certainly. It's also really difficult for the building department to say what a percentage is, so I don't even know that percentage is a metric, but you could use square footage. So I think that, so if, right now, we have something, that are policies, like when more than 50% of a deck railing is replaced on an older cabin, the entire deck railing needs to be brought up to code. I think it's something like that.
So it's specific to what they're,
Well, I'm just saying that's an example. They already implement some things in this way.
So would you be comfortable with 50%?
well, it really depends upon what it is
Well,
and to what scope they're gonna make you
And that would-
bring things up to standard.
And I think it would only apply to the exterior envelope. We're not talking about people changing their carpet and cabinets.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, so,
And I think
I
that
think we'd
if
have
you
to be
make,
specific about that.
if you make it too restrictive, then people aren't gonna even, they're not gonna get a permit, and B, they're not gonna upgrade at all, because it's cost prohibitive. So if you put it to where,
Well, it's not, because most of these things are not a big cost issue. So in my experience, most people who are replacing siding and windows are going to do this anyway. That's half the reason they're doing it, is to make their place more fire resistant and less maintenance, more durable for the long run. I mean, it has other benefits besides fire resistance typically, depending on what people choose to do. And I don't want to tell people exactly what to do. My concern is we don't build that many new buildings every year here in Calaveras County. So it's the same, it ripples through every piece of the things we're talking about, is unless we figure out a way to address our existing housing stock, we're barely gonna move the needle.
It seems to be unless we put in the percentage, the consultants are just gonna pull something
Well,
out
no,
of the
that's
air.
why we're discussing. Me, I might make it like, I would probably go over 50% and be looking at more like if you're replacing more than 60% of your windows, doors, siding, your roofing has to be done anyway under the code, because roofing has been acknowledged to be the riskiest spot. So that's been in place for a long time. So,
I'm pro encouragement, I just have a hard time with adopting sometimes.
Well, I mean,
it's up to everybody here. So.
yeah, we either discuss it now or we discuss it if it comes back from the consultants.
Right.
Again, I think it's best for us to make things as specific as possible for the consultants. And so, at least for now, I'd go with 60% in both of these.
And here's a whole nother piece to this, is
Okay.
that I'm just aware that it's common for people to do these kind of projects without a building permit anyway.
Yeah.
Or to decide to do it halfway through a project, and so it wasn't included in their original permit and no one really looks at it. It just happens.
And if you adopt it, I think there's gonna be less people pulling permits to do it. That's all.
Well, I don't. I think that people choose to pull a permit or not pull a permit, this reason would not be it.
Well, then perhaps I'll go back from what I just said. In order to get this to the consultants, leave it the way it is. And,
Well, I mean, the proposal, the first one, to adopt an ordinance requiring conformance with the current codes when more than X% of a structure or feature is modified, goes on to say, would require further review to be specific about which measures would be included for different types of projects, which makes sense to me. Now, as I sit here, I am not competent to do that exercise. That has to be a building person or a contractor or somebody who knows the subject matter, and that's not me. And so I at least am not capable of making suggestions to be more specific to the consultants on this subject. Perhaps
And I
others here
don't
are,
think it's
but
necessary, because then an ordinance would come back to the building department for them. They have an advisory committee, that group would get together and come up.
maybe what we ought to say is a specified percentage.
I would take,
way-
I have two things here. I would just leave the most generic one to go to the consultants, because we don't have to solve the problem today. What we have to do is say, conceptually, we're open to the idea of looking at something along these
Yeah,
lines,
yeah,
right?
That's fine, but that's what I was thinking of, by saying certain percentage, why then you don't, this isn't a fill in the blank right now, sort of.
Well, I would think an ordinance would have to be written, they would debate that issue
Yeah.
at that time, so we don't really need to say it now.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
suggesting, is that if we say a certain percentage to be determined.
Oh, well,
Or something
right.
like that.
I don't even know if we need to say that, because when they go to, when everyone is looking at that topic on its own more closely, there may be whole things I'm not even considered, because I didn't spend hours and hours and hours on this document. I sat down and, did a bunch of research and tried to throw together as much as I could. But I think we're going to get hung up among ourselves trying to solve issues that are really the next step. And I don't want to see us, I want to see us get something back to the consultants.
Well, how about the first version?
The first
and
version.
we'll take the second version.
That's what I had already done, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Because I realized I had duplicated that, yeah. Are you comfortable with that?
well, I'm comfortable with not specifying any percentage.
Yeah.
I think
that's
the
what-
XX implies that that's to be determined. What I'm still not real comfortable about is the flat adopted ordinance that requires. It may turn out that this just doesn't work. So investigate the feasibility of adopting one I'd be more comfortable with. I know Mr. Laddish won't like that, but I think it.
I've already folded on that one.
How about consider adopting
That's
an
better,
ordinance?
yeah.
With everybody, okay? Oh, my gosh.
And I think it's,
You know, we're going through this, and I talked to Gina, and I was telling her, this really is being left to us, who we're not experts in all these areas. I have such a problem with, that we spent all this money on this, and to me, it just seems like a boilerplate
Yeah.
that they sent out to every county in California or America, I don't even know.
Oh, I
And-
went
and
to
they're-
the few places that have hired these particular
Okay.
consultants,
Hey,
but they
that's
all
what I'm
have a
saying.
similar one.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes.
These particular consultants are sending out this boilerplate, which, I don't know what we're paying for this, but to me, it's very disappointing that it's not more specific to our community and our county. I've just had a problem from the get-go, and then they're leaving it to us who are not experts in this field. We really need them to be the experts, I would think, to get it narrowed down to something that's more manageable for the layman like us to deal with.
and our county staff, some of them.
I mean, I would need to probably dedicate my entire work week to trying to research everything in here that they didn't research for us. I just have had a problem from the beginning with it because unfortunately I have 3 businesses. I want to participate as much as I can, and you guys are doing a great job. I just want to thank you for doing my work because I don't have time to commit that you gentlemen and you are dedicating. And I appreciate it. I want to tell you because it's a lot. And, you know, I want to participate as much as I can. And I'm Captain Obvious today because this is boilerplate and it's made it very difficult for us.
And I think what I would suggest, since this isn't the thing we're going to be voting on, I'd like to suggest that the chair in her memo that's going to go to the consultant say that that the planning commission agrees in principle to her suggestions, you know, so that it isn't just one commissioner.
I will be passing it on to Gabriel and Gina. They are gonna pass on
Yeah.
everything to the consultants
Right.
with their, like, these are Michelle's personal comments and diatribe, and these are the ones that represent things that were discussed by the commission as a whole.
But I think it's important that your comments are presented with the statement that there was agreement in principle by the commission.
I will have other comments that there may not be
No, it's
agreement in
fine.
principle,
Yeah.
so.
With
And that's not
that,
gonna stop me from making them.
with that in mind, the council has advised me that in order for, say you made your revised comments, in order for us to ever see those revised comments, we need to continue this for another week, or for another time, so that you can provide us with copies. Isn't that correct?
I think we need to move on. I think we are dragging this out far, far too long.
Well,
And I think I wrote down all you guys' comments. I will be happy to send it back if everybody wants to look at it again. We're providing fodder to the consultants
Yeah.
for them to work into it. Their new version is going to come back to us. We can
Right.
debate the specifics at that point.
Yeah.
If we try to wordsmith everything before we send it to the consultants, we're not going to
No,
agree.
I fully agree.
Let's dissect it on the next round.
But
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I'm trying to say. I don't know.
You
if
don't want to see that again.
I think we have a whole lot more that we need to work our way through today in order to get
Yeah.
ready for our meeting with the consultant. Also, Gabriel, did we talk to them about maybe talking to us one last time?
Madam Chair, yeah, we did talk to them. Now, they are beginning to tell us that they were just about to do like a contract amendment because they were already running out of money. So we're gonna have to figure out exactly how we're gonna proceed with their assistance. But it's very crucial that I haven't spent this amount of time going through this, that we have another go-around with them, and we may have to do some kind of a budget amendment with them for that to take place.
I think maybe the next time we deal with them, though, would be they're coming back to us with our contributions reflected.
I had asked Gabriel if it was possible for them to come back once before then to talk to us, just to make sure we understood everything, but that might not make sense. It might make better sense to just get our information to them. But then to make sure, I would like to make sure that even if it takes a budget amendment, that they plan to spend more than, well, we have to leave at noon
Yeah.
with us next time, and we don't even get through the whole document in a cursory way. I think they need to be here for that discussion, and we need to make ourselves as concise and efficient as we can, so that we all come ready to comment on that next round when we get it back, and I don't know how long that will be.
But I would suggest that our next input from the consultants be when we see what they have done with our suggestions.
Yeah.
I may just ask a question. I'm sorry, my microphone's not working. It's pretty. But,
Sorry.
So we were doing this on COG's budget before, and I don't know if I missed something when I was gone. I just want to make sure, we're talking a budget amendment that COG is willing to pay? Or are we talking about a budget amendment that may need approval of our board of supervisors, depending on how big it is?
Nobody's investigated it yet that I
Okay.
know of.
Because that, we can't just necessarily approve here a budget
No,
amendment.
no, I'm understanding. I'm just saying, I think we need to talk to them because they clearly did not allocate enough time to attend meetings. They have never sat through a discussion of the entire thing. They've been, scheduled themselves on to the next item. I think in defense of consultants in general, they haven't done a lot of these yet. This is their first rodeo too with this particular thing, and they're doing it with several places. And I think they just don't know how much time it's going to take and how much input they're going to get from staff that helps them tailor each thing to particular counties and cities. It just seems like everyone's struggling.
So it kind of sounds like we might need to be talking to COG to see whether or not this is a budget amendment that is paid by COG through the grant
But
process.
first find out how much time they have
Yeah.
allocated for that next phase. Maybe they have plenty of time allocated, I just don't think so from what we've seen.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think the first thing for us to do is to actually take a look at the existing contract that we have, look at the principles, look at the amount, look at the tasks that we agreed for them to do, and look at the degree of completion of those tasks. And if we need to extend that, then we figure out exactly who's going to be responsible for additional funding. Is it the county? Is it COG? Or so we'll get that information for you.
And I think that the consultants will have a better idea of what time they're going to need once they get our suggestions.
And now that they've met us.
Yeah. So, so can I move on to my proposals?
Yes, what should we be looking at in particular right now?
My proposals are really, and even though I've got three different sets of comments, the first set is different than the others in that it came before we received a suggestion from Tom Infacino that we include the actual parts of the general plan in our suggested changes. The main thing from my first memo, and I'm not going to, I'm assuming everybody's read these. Let me know if you haven't. The main thing from the first memo was that suggesting that they actually adopt the same form that one of the consultants used for the transportation measures, where they actually have in the left-hand column a very definite reduce by X amount, or increase electric vehicles by X amount, or something of that sort. And then have their basically implementation measures in the rest of the body of the reduction plan. I don't know otherwise how they're going to come up with a figure that, okay, this is going to reduce it by X amount. And my understanding is that, I mean, this whole exercise would be meaningless unless the consultants end up saying to us, you do these things and you will either meet or you will not meet your goal set in the general plan. So I'm looking for an endorsement that yes, the other consultants need to adopt this strategy of having a very definite goal, and that My suggestion is that the category column on the left-hand side be renamed as the mandated action column, and that each action in the column be stated as a mandate, that each mandated action contain a clear numeric amount that can lead to the calculation of GHG reduction. I'm hoping that you all are in agreement with that, so we can have some specifics here.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Ladish, something related to this came up at the Board of Supervisors meeting on Tuesday, and the discussion was about decarbonizing the county's fleet of vehicles.
Could you speak up a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I thought I was. I said this issue came up actually at the Board of Supervisors meeting on Tuesday, when the discussion was about decarbonizing the city's fleet of vehicles. If you look at TR2, it doesn't have a page number, but it says decarbonize the county municipal fleet and related commuter vehicles to achieve a X% ZEV fleet by 2030. Now, they left that kind of undefined because it becomes a budgetary issue for the county. How do we start and where do we start? The supervisors talked about perhaps maybe we can start with hybrid vehicles. Well, if the goal is to decarbonize the fleet, it didn't say electrify the entire fleet by 2030. So if we went from fuel to hybrid vehicles, we are decarbonizing to a certain extent. The question is, how many of those are we going to be able to do fiscally by the year 2030? And then you look at each individual departments within the county. You got the sheriff's department, you got the fire department, you've got Health and Human Services. There are certain departments that actually are very that use vehicles a lot more than others. In the planning department, we go out on the field every once in a while, but there are certain departments that actually live in their vehicles. So how do we address that? And then how do we address the issue of being able to charge these vehicles once we get them? We don't have any charging stations, in the county at this particular time. So, but there are outfits out there that could actually install one for us, and we can pay as you go by users. But leaving the percentage kind of open-ended provides a benefit, because we then have the opportunity to set a target. Right now, all our vehicles are gas engines. We don't have one single vehicle, to my knowledge, that it's electric or hybrid. So when we're starting from scratch, it's going to be a gradual process. But I think I understand what Commissioner Ladish is trying to say is, it would be nice if we knew that if we did a category, pick one hypothetical category, if we did that, it's going to end up in reducing our greenhouse gas by a fixed percentage. We don't have the latitude of knowing that at this particular time. What we do know is that we have a big target, which is reduce GHG by 40% by a particular time, but we don't know the incrementals that go along to reaching that 40%, and that becomes a challenge. Now, I have brought this issue up with the consultants, and they said it is almost impossible for them to allocate a percentage to the column that you're referring to on the gray column on the left-hand side, because this is something that hasn't really been tested. So they couldn't really tell you that if you decarbonize all your vehicles by year 2020, your GHG reduction would be 25% or 15% or 5% or 50%. They couldn't tell us that. So all we can do is do the best we can by taking these incremental steps, and ultimately, when everything kind of comes together, then we might have an environment that is a little cleaner than from where we started.
Well, I strongly believe that you set the goals, you can change the goals as this plan goes on. But unless you have some goal, I mean, we have, the goal in the plan is 40% less than 1990 levels. So that goal has been set. It seems to me you can set other goals, and then if that turns out to be, if we can't save as much in reducing greenhouse gases in transportation as we thought we could, but in some other areas we could do more, they can change it. But I think unless we put in the goals, what's the point of this whole exercise, other than a bunch of little things saying, oh, it would be nice to do this, it'd be nice to do that, it'd be nice to do that. There's 2030 is not that long away. And I really think that they need to set percentages. And as explained by the Rincon consultant that did the transportation, you do that, there's your mandatory action. Then the fact that a lot of the strategies that are put in just provide substantial evidence on how you're going to meet that goal, even if they are not all of them mandatory issues. But I just think that for now, the consultants have to, there must be another phrase that doesn't involve off the pot. It's time for them to come forth with goals and how we're going to meet these goals.
I think they're going to come back to us with some sort of a calculation. They're going to tell us what that calculation is based on. I think until we see that, but I don't know that every single category lends itself to assigning a specific percentage.
Well, let them tell us that.
Well, I think they're going to do that because we're going to see how they're showing that reduction, how they're coming up with the reduction.
Yeah.
And I can pretty much, I am certain that they're going to come back to us and tell us that we don't have enough things in here to get there. That's what we're going to find out. But until we see that, we don't know. And I'm not willing to sign on to telling them that every one of our categories needs a percentage reduction in it until I see what they come up with as how they think we could possibly get there.
Well, I think it's...
And then I think we could swap things around and look at it and decide which areas are ripe for being given a percentage and which areas we really have to say, well, we're going to come back and look at this in 3 years or 5 years and see what kind of progress we've made. And then we will have a better sense.
I would rather stick it to them to come up with percentage and have them say...
They're going to have a percentage. There's no other way for them to, but whether it belongs here or whether it belongs in their calculation and we see where they're taking those deductions, I just don't think, I don't need to see a percentage in this category for the next round.
Right. And Madam Chair, if one thing they've actually done is they have given us the third column, the emissions reduction ranking, I think is an indication as to how valuable each one of these goals are. For example, if you look at SW1, SW1 has a low ranking. the cost ranking is medium. So what they're saying is, if you take SW1 next to TR2, you get more reduction in greenhouse gases with a TR2 than you would get with SW1. Unfortunately, our staff has determined that SW1 is a no-go. And SW1 says implement waste diversion program. We don't, I think staff was here at your last planning commission meeting to explain to you some of the challenges. Some of these programs, we may be exempt from them. So I think, Madam Chair, you're absolutely right. It may come down to the fact that we don't have enough goals in this to actually reach 40% because of a lot of reasons, some of which are not our fault. It's just a possibility.
And I think there's the opportunity for us to get more creative. We talked about, let's quantify what's happening with at-home or on-site composting, just because we're a rural county and that's happening anyway. But there's nowhere here for us to quantify that. But that's the consultant's job, is to figure out that instead of using the percentages that they would use in Modesto, they might need to look at that the benefit of having curbside composting is smaller here, but we already are accomplishing much of that just by the nature of our communities. So how do we find that out? I don't know how we quantify some of that stuff, and that's a question for those consultants who are selling their services to rural communities. And I feel the same way about, there's all this talk about how we can make our wastewater transportation and processing more efficient, but what percentage, we got some numbers on the number of new septic permits, but we need to know what percentage of our buildings right now are using septic systems, which clearly use less power. And so there's already an inherent reduction if we were to look at those metrics per population. And I just don't think that's what I feel is missing from here, is this tailoring of it to our very, very rural community. And so when we look at what's really going to cost money and is going to be very effective, maybe those should be adjusted a little bit for us. But I'm, like Commissioner Parker, I am not an expert.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I see that there is not consensus to my suggestion, which I'm not going to withdraw, but I'm going to make it.
Well, some of these, as presented by the consultants, do have X percentage by 2030.
Yeah.
Some do not. There's a reason why some do not.
Yeah.
How do you quantify the category of education and outreach with a percentage?
I agree.
And when you look at one of the transportation ones, TR-4, increase active transportation mode, that doesn't have it because that's to encourage bicycling. There's no way to measure it. And that's probably why they didn't suggest it. And I suspect the same thing is true, and I think it's been confirmed of the others that did not come to us with that kind of quantification to be built in. And so I'm not prepared to tell the consultants they should be doing something that they are suggesting they can't do.
Right, but they
Well, I'd like to have them-
have a calculation, a spreadsheet of some kind that is going to quantify these things somehow, because they're gonna have to come to us with something.
I think if you look at it, it's one consultant is suggesting the percentages, and the main consultant firm is not. And I don't think it's because they can't. I think it's because they didn't want to do what the other consultant did. So anyhow, as an individual commissioner, I'm making that suggestion to them. And I'd like to at least hear their response. We're anticipating
Yeah.
what their response would be. And
I'm suggesting, you're, obviously, you can make whatever recommendation to them that you like, but I'm suggesting that this discussion might more appropriately happen after we see their estimates. And we can see where they think most of it is coming from, and then we can make a determination about, well, it does look like they could put some goals in there, and then can we agree on those goals?
Right.
But right now, I think we're shooting in the dark and we're spending a lot of
Yeah,
time on it.
I'm a little concerned that, you know, if you're gonna send forward individual comments that aren't the consensus of the commission, they're not gonna know what to do with that. You know, then we're still gonna have
I
this,
think they're gonna take them just like
Hodgepodge,
any comment
exactly.
from the public,
and
right?
we're gonna be having this discussion all over again about,
well, they asked for individual commissioners to make comments to them at the first meeting. And I assume you've passed on what I've sent to you.
everything that you've sent me thus far has been passed on,
Yeah.
yes.
I
And so,
think they should treat them exactly like they treat something that came from any member of the public.
Unless, as we did with yours,
Right.
there's some sort of consensus.
Right.
And then, so if anybody,
Commissioner Plotnick said she had a separate set of comments that were just Plotnick comments that
Right.
aren't being discussed. So those will be identified as, this is Michelle Plotnick, not speaking as a planning commissioner, but speaking as an architect in the community who has
Right.
additional.
And
I guess, then the question, as far as my first set, which did not involve implementation measures from the general plan, does anybody have particular problems with any of my suggestions there? We don't need to spend time on it, just see what the consultants say. If so, if there are no comments on that, I want to move on to my second and third set of comments. I think sometimes we need to step back and realize that the greenhouse gas reduction plan is not a game, that unless we and the rest of the world reverse course, we're going to be heading down an existential slope leading to discomfort, disaster, and eventual mass extinction. This is a serious subject. We have a chance to make one step in this reversal of course today. And my second and third sets of comments, which is an approach that was suggested by Tom Infacimo, is to put into the greenhouse gas reduction plan actual implementation measures that are contained in the 2019 Calaveras General Plan. In contrast to what we've been discussing, the consultants tend to come up with boilerplate things, which of course trigger a discussion, but many of them are not directly relevant to Calaveras County. These implementation measures were determined by the Board of Supervisors as being directly applicable to Calaveras County. We're not talking about letters from the public that are coming up with this content. These are formal parts of the Calaveras General Plan. And so what, you might ask? What's the effect of that? Well, California Supreme Court in Lesher Communications versus City of Walnut Creek determined that the general plan is the most important planning document, that it's the constitution of planning documents. And when an ordinance is enacted, if it's inconsistent with the general plan, it is, according to the California Supreme Court, invalid at the time it is passed. In that case, involved an initiative passed by the voters. that was determined not to be an amendment to the general plan, but was inconsistent with it, and the court said it was invalid at the time it was passed. Now, as our general plan recognizes, it can be amended, but until it is, we as the Planning Commission have no power to act inconsistently with the general plan. The timing of the implementation measures, you look at the general plan, came into effect in 2019, the GHG reduction plan needs its results by 2030. And clearly, the sooner that these provisions that reflect or affect GHG reduction are implemented, the better it will be. But the implementation timing is still up to the Board of Supervisors. There's nothing in my suggestions that indicate that that we're trying to usurp the Board of Supervisors when it comes to timing of implementation. As I said before, we need to give consultants specific guidance with provisions tailored to Calaveras County. And the Board of Supervisors has given us those, and specifically applicable to Calaveras County. And so I think to the extent we can, we actually include those implementation measures in this greenhouse gas reduction plan, which is what my second and third set of comments attempted to do. Now I had indicated that, because I understood this to be the case, that the Planning Commission agreed to this approach, but they had not specifically considered any specific proposal. But I'd like to throw these open for discussion. And now, if you have any disagreement as to the approach, and or a disagreement that a certain provision would be inappropriate to put in, that's, I think, where we should go from here.
I thought we discussed this last time and that there was agreement that if it is in the general plan, I'm too far from that it should be in this plan. This plan should take its lead from what has already been approved by this Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors.
And we had a problem with it.
Well, they've been adopted, so it doesn't matter really what any of us individually feel about those individual items at this point. I think they should at least come back to us in this plan. Whether they get prioritized or not is not really.
Well, here's the problem. The general plan provisions do not have a timetable, and they don't have quantifiable objectives.
Right.
And there's a reason for that. When we started this process in 2015, there was a joint meeting of the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission. And the county council advised against including such things. And we didn't. Now, when you take these general plan provisions and you insert them into the GHG reduction plan, and this is what set me off last time, Mr. Laddish's second set of comment says, if those implementation measures which pertain to GHG reduction were included in the GHG reduction plan with their expected GHG emission reductions by 2030, the general plan provisions would be provided with both implementation timeframes and quantified objectives. That's the problem that I see. Now, it may have come to pass through discussions this morning that that's not a problem, because we're not going to have, and perhaps, depending on what the consultants come up with, quantifiable objectives for every single thing. I'm still concerned about the time frame, because if you put these things into the GHG reduction plan, and 2030 rolls around and something's not done, have you just given would-be litigators ammunition to sue the county with?
I understand your concern. I still think every item that is in the general plan should be in the greenhouse gas reduction plan. Not every single one of them will necessarily be prioritized or be accomplishable, quantifiable with a particular date and percentage. So I think we have to look at those individually. So I think I'm probably somewhere in between. Like, I believe they need to be there because we need to stop losing track of what we say we're going to do. And I think by repeating them in the greenhouse reduction plan, something we have all already agreed to, then we're at least giving ourselves a framework to work with. And then we're going to have to look at not just us, because in the end, this will be the Board of Supervisors who make these decisions. But we have to prioritize which are the most beneficial, which are the most accomplishable, and how far can we get by 2030. But we have a deadline. We have 2030. We're going to have to identify which ones should be prioritized and that we need to have some real milestones for. I think that's something we'll be looking to the consultants to help us with, though, because they can tell us which, they have their little matrix here of which things are high cost and which things are high effectiveness, and they're going to look through all those implementation measures. But they have to be melded into this, or why do we have a general plan?
And I'd add to that, by 2030, my preferred practice, we should have another general plan. I mean, the government code requires the State Office of Planning to notify the Attorney General if a plan has not been revised within 10 years. There's no specific statutory requirement that we do another general plan in 8 years or whatever. But 2030, I mean, that's 11 years after the general plan came to. If these provisions have any meaning at all, there needs to be consideration about when we are going to implement it. And that is still up to the Board of Supervisors. And if they think it's unreasonable, they can amend the general plan. That's how the general plan starts with, this plan is amendable.
Well, realistically, we should be monitoring our success at the implementation measures throughout the general plan, not just with respect to this. And when this plan is adopted, it will need to be monitored and a report back to the Board of Supervisors every year on how much progress we're making in each of these items. And any of the plans can be modified in the future. But we have to have a starting place. And it seems like the implementation measures in the general plan are a good place to start. I don't think that means that we are saying that we are going to accomplish every single one of them in whole by 2030. And I think we would want to be careful not to say that for all the reasons Gabriel talked about and Commissioner Roosters talked about. But I think if we don't start setting them out there as goals, 2030 is gonna come around and we won't have accomplished any of them, because that's just the nature of the beast.
So long as we're not locking ourselves in for each of these provisions on a specific time frame, then it's not going to be a big issue.
I think we can do that wording that clarifies that these are our aspirations, and we can pick and choose the ones that we are saying are most important and achievable.
Which is what the Board of Supervisors does.
Yeah, that's their job. That's why they get the big bucks. Yeah.
The other piece is that we're, in order to tier off of the document for CEQA purposes, I mean, if the state agrees that we're able to do that, then I would suspect that it's adequate. There's nothing in the adoption of the reduction plan that mandates that we actually achieve the goal. Obviously, we want to try to, but it's a different document than the general plan. And I think that we have to have enough in there that it satisfies, the board would like us to be able to use it to tier off of. So for that purpose, we would need to have enough in there to satisfy the state.
Plus, it seems like consistency among all of our plans is a desirable thing in any case, and so we put that effort into the general plan, which was a 20-year effort, if I recall. And we hope that what's in there is worthy of being moved on to our greenhouse gas reduction plan.
Madam Chair, if I may,
I'm listening at this point, and I just find myself, I'm just looking at this whole package that they've given us, and it just feels to me like it's put together for big cities. We don't pollute in the way that big cities do. We have a much smaller population. We don't, we're rural. And for them to hold our percentages to be the same as a city's percentages don't seem to make a lot of sense to me in the first place. I think that we should all try and do our best to reduce emissions. I think everybody believes that.
But that's why.
But for us to be held to percentages that a city is being held to just doesn't make any sense.
Well, I wouldn't think that we would be. But the point right now is to put in specific measures from the Calaveras general plan gets away from the cookie cutter approach that we've seen from the consultants. These are provisions that has gone through review by the Planning Commission, gone reviewed by the Board of Supervisors, and has been adopted as applicable to Calaveras County. And that's why I think it's very important that we get these implementation measures in as a part of this plan to replace, in great degree, that's what I'm suggesting, a lot of these things are replace so-and-so with such and such. Replace it with an implementation provision from the Calaveras general plan to make it more specifically applicable to the rural and other aspects of Calaveras County that distinguish it from other cities and counties.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Ladish, to further buttress your point, the general plan has an environmental impact report attached to it. We would assume that EIR has actually gone into some of these specific areas. Now, maybe not at the very project-specific level, but it would have done air quality analysis, hydrology, solid waste, and so on and so forth. So it is the most complete document that we have that is backed by some kind of scientific proof. Not having that as part of the GHG reduction, in my opinion, would be kind of missing the mark. But I also recognize that what Commissioner Worcester is saying, which is, if, for example, the general plan has a mitigation measure that extends beyond the year 2030, by incorporating that into the GHG reduction plan, we run into potential conflicts, which may or may not be the case. It just depends on what the implementation measure is and how that relates to actually getting the GHG reduction plan going forward. But I think we'll miss the mark if we don't incorporate the general plan implementation measures into the GHG. I think we'll miss the mark if you don't do that.
And that's what I was asking Commissioner Parker about, is whether you agree with that approach.
In principle, yes. Yeah. I guess I'm torn.
So you weren't here through all of the, necessarily
No, I
all of the. But if we have an implementation measure that we have, that as a community we have agreed to, and we had good participation in the general plan hearings by the community. So I believe that it does make sense for us to move that item into this plan. We're not creating any new commitment or any new items. We are just making sure that what we have previously said is reflected in our current document. Does that make sense to you?
That does, as long as there's not percentages attached.
Well, that's a separate.
That's a separate
that's a separate
discussion.
thing. We've already.
But I thought that's what I was hearing you say, that you wanted to make sure that they have some percentages.
Well,
That was his earlier thing, we're on a new topic.
Okay,
So
so
they're
you lost
a
me.
related and entangled
Okay,
topic.
yes, it's very important.
But
Well,
so,
that was.
so
that
I
was
think
earlier.
we are all in agreement that yes, we want our greenhouse reduction plan to reflect our general plan. And then the prioritization and how we characterize each of those things as a percentage is still up in the air.
I think the consistency is imperative, I think.
Okay,
Okay.
so Commissioner Radish, do you have a next item?
Yeah, I do. And then this will just take a moment. We did thankfully receive some comments from the staff with some suggestions. And I volunteered to write a memo on my own behalf and submit it so it could go to the consultants that tend to fold particularly the Air Resources Control District's comments into the form of the greenhouse gas reduction plan. And also the building department's suggestions. There are a few things that he raised that I think make sense. Now, we can go through those, or you can just let me submit a memorandum and we see what comes back from the consultants.
My personal feeling is that we could provide those comments just as they were provided to us, to the consultant, and let them do their job with them and slot them in where they see it is appropriate. I'm not sure it needs to be filtered through the planning commission in this case, because I didn't see anything in there that seemed like it needed interpretation, really.
I think the more we can tell or suggest to the consultants, this is where you could put this is where you could put that. So I'll just do an individual memorandum, and with it attaching those comments, and say, this, you could do this, you could do that, whatever, and I won't indicate that it's been this.
Or you can send it to us, but it.
Well, I can't send it to you.
Right.
I can't, unless we continue this to the next meeting.
So let's
I
talk
thought
about
it was just-
that. I thought that we had already agreed this was going to be continued one more time at our last meeting. Although now we did get all are there any additional staff comments that we're expecting?
We didn't get a copy of Robert Patchinger's comments today, but it dealt with.
I don't think we got our
One
farm
item.
advisor either, did we? Scott Onetto didn't submit, did he?
No.
No, I'll have to remind
Right,
him.
so we don't have our
Because I thought his were already typed out, I was expecting just to get them, but he's a busy man, I'll have to remind him.
When you get them, would you just forward them?
Absolutely.
To the consultants? I don't think, I defer to council here. I've been undergoing a Brown Act education recently. And like my understanding is, a memo that I would now write for submission to the consultants, I cannot share with you, even at the next meeting in the commission reports, unless it's on the matters on the agenda.
Well,
Right.
and it's because for commissioners, it's a little different. I mean, even a commissioner, I would say, writing something in their own capacity, you can't, no quorum of a body, of a hearing body or a governmental body can discuss outside an open public meeting anything that's within its subject matter jurisdiction. So concepts that you have about what something should look like that can be discussed at an open public meeting can't be shared with more than one other commissioner. So that's how the Brown Act works. Now, if an individual member of the public who's not on the hearing body submits something, that can be sent to all commissioners.
But we can't discuss
But you can't
it.
discuss it with each other or share with each other
Right,
about
right.
it.
And if we communicate to a member of the public, we need to make clear to that member of the public that they should not forward it on to the commissioners.
Well, and so there's a process for sending comments through the planning department to the commission. If a constituent does send something, especially, you know, somebody in your board member's jurisdiction, you know, if it's meant to go to the commission, then I would forward it to Annette for inclusion as.
No, what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
if I send a copy of my comments about the staff's comments to the staff member,
Yeah,
and that staff member cannot legitimately share that with other commissioners or
right,
with
that's
subvert.
creating a Brown Act
Yeah.
problem by
Right.
doing that, if it's outside of the meeting.
Well,
Right.
when I look at the staff comments, building department, for example, I don't think if there's anything I need to add to that. It's pretty self-explanatory. It explains what they're doing, and it explains why a few of these provisions are not feasible here. And the other ones, I don't think are quite as specific.
Right.
But I would have nothing to add to them, and so I agree with the chair's suggestion that they'd simply go to the consultants as is.
Commissioner Parker.
I do think we have a lot of time, though, to spend on Commissioner Radish's specific examples of what should be included. Many I agree with, some I have questions about, and it's going to take a while to go through those.
Examples of implementation measures.
Yes.
I don't think we need to discuss them. I think they all need to go in. If they're in the general plan, they go to the, without necessarily additional interpretation by us.
Perhaps.
So why don't you give it, why don't you read one to us and then we can talk about it?
Yeah.
We can talk about what's an appropriate level of detail for passing on to them.
Just by example, let's take a look at the first one, add COS-5E, which is to modify the county's development standards and so forth. That's fine. It does seem superfluous with existing RE-1. It's the same subject matter. And when we get to PF-3A, it's much the same as COS-5E. It's almost identical. And I think I prefer COS-5E and probably get rid of RE-1 because we're going to wind up with a mishmash of stuff that's duplicative and perhaps a little bit inconsistent.
Maybe the time to do that is when we see what they come back to us with.
So my suggestion was we ask them to associate those with one of their items. So they reference and put the wording from the general plan implementation measure or goal and policy measure, depending on what it is that's getting in there. So that we can see them together. I agree. It's not like we want to duplicate the same. They have items in there that are essentially the same thing, and we have items that are very similar. So they could be grouped together, but we could still reference the item
It'd be easier
and
to-
provide an appendix if it starts to be awfully wordy, which it could be. That appendix could have the actual wording of the measures so that somebody could reference them quickly without having to go to the general plan and
Yeah,
download it section by section.
That would be helpful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one thing I did not suggest, which I think I will now, is to the consultants that when they are including language from the general plan implementation measures, that they have a site. to
Right,
the measures.
that was my point.
Yeah,
Yes.
That I think, if they just have the language in there, well, we're going to be kind of,
But I think any knowledgeable consultant will know how to do this.
let's hope so.
You know,
That's refreshing. I like that thought.
Let me go through some of these though, because some I don't Some I don't think are really relevant or are so tangentially irrelevant that they shouldn't be included.
Okay.
There's a lot that are fine. Most are fine. And I do have a list. Okay. RP-5A, which has to do with geothermal resources. I had trouble seeing the relevance of that to a greenhouse gas reduction plan.
Well, that's an
Oh,
alternative.
it's an alternative mechanical system that I've actually evaluated for use here. It hasn't been cost effective for use here. That doesn't mean that won't change in the future. But geothermal heat pumps, ground source water heat pumps are used pretty widely.
Okay,
So,
then that's good.
yeah.
That answers my question.
You just happened to hit one I actually had to do something about.
What's up out there?
Okay, I think it's circulation dash 2D is the RIM fee and benefit basin fee update. And I think he said do that and include non-vehicle improvements. How does that pertain to the greenhouse gas reduction plan?
I don't know, because I'd have to look at what they're looking at in that fee study, but,
This is on page 5 of the,
yeah.
of the collection of implementation measures.
But
And I was assuming that the basin fees
we already
have to
did it
do-
once and closed it.
have to do with greenhouse gases.
The what fee?
Benefit basin. fee.
No, it's unrelated to greenhouse gases. It has to do with the development within a designated area of roadway improvements generally. It could be pedestrian, and there could be a tangential,
Well,
to use Commissioner Rooster's, they could overlap.
And C dash.
I don't see a problem with having it in there.
And C-2D concludes with include in the impact fee calculations, non-vehicular
Right.
improvements such as pedestrian and bicycle facilities,
Right.
park and ride lots, and public transportation
Exactly.
infrastructure, which is definitely a part of this.
Right. So it doesn't hurt, it might not, when they are determining a RIM fee or updating the benefit basin fees, they're looking primarily at the financial side of those improvements, but that doesn't mean that in the future they wouldn't be looking at the benefits to the greenhouse gas reduction plan.
Non-pedestrian and bicycle facilities,
Right.
park and ride lots is definitely a part of it.
Right, but they're looking in those, when determining those fees, they're
Right.
not necessarily looking at greenhouse. They haven't.
They have-
Traditionally, but it doesn't mean they won't in the future.
Okay, it's hard, it's still hard for me to see how that is so relevant, if you will, that it ought to be included, but if the consultants don't like it, I guess they can keep it out.
And all they're doing is referencing that these are things that are in the general plan and could be applicable, so it doesn't hurt anything to have the reference.
Well, it's COS-4D, which is oak woodlands, which is develop local mitigation measures and so forth, and then there's in interim provisions that are there. I have trouble seeing how that fits into a greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan on a gross emissions basis, which is what, at least for the moment, we're doing. Because basically, you could say that provision might help preserve grasslands or oak woodlands or something, and therefore contribute to taking carbon out of the air. But it's pretty hard to see how that has much to do with gross emissions.
But it is directly applicable to the big picture of greenhouse gases and carbon sequestration
It is, but.
and preservation of those potential sequestration banks in the
We're
county.
mitigating significant direct and cumulative impacts to oak woodlands in conjunction with discretionary project approval. You know, it's like the same relevance that Williamson Act would have.
Yeah.
And that would be great if you were talking about net emissions. In other words, taking account of the carbon that's pulled out of the air, but we're not.
He's
That's the
saying maybe
problem.
it needs to be reclassified into something that is talking about sequestration versus emissions.
It just that it is, the reason I put it where I suggested it go is that it is dealing with development, which is where
I feel like all of these things are the job of our consultant to organize the information and materials in a way that makes sense and in a way that fits into what they're gonna then use as their calculations. So they need to slot them into the right. I think we're doing the job of the consultants when we try to tell them exactly where something goes. I think certainly giving them the list of items, here, you know, here's where you find all these things in the general plan, although I would have been really pleased if they would have taken that upon themselves as a starting place, but I do think we really have to trust that they know where the most appropriate place for each of those
I
items
agree, but I
is.
think it's good to make a suggestion, as I have, where to put it. And if they say, oh, that's not the right place, let's put it over here.
I
that's
think
just fine.
if we make a suggestion as a commission, they're gonna put it where we say and not necessarily where it both
I
best
don't-
fits.
I think at this point that if we can report, as I did actually, that the general approach is something that everybody agrees with, the individual suggestions are my own.
Yeah.
And then I think we're,
Well, okay, I was prepared to do a lot more in terms of doing the consultant's work on fine tuning some of these, but if we don't think it's necessary, then
Let's just scrutinize it when it comes back.
Let's see what Gina and Gabriel, who've actually had direct contact with the consultants and maybe have a better sense of it, do you believe that by us telling them and giving them the list of measures and saying that we want to see those reflected in the plan is sufficient and they can slot them into the appropriate and decide what the best way to reference them is, whether it's a footnote or an appendix or...
well, I don't have a problem giving them the list, but I don't think it's appropriate for the commission to tell them that every one of these is relevant enough to include in the plan.
I think we can leave that to them also.
Yeah, I'm certain that we can leave that to them. I mean, they are supposedly the experts.
Yeah.
Well, as long as they're included, we have tried to identify everything that could possibly have anything to do with the GH reduction plan, and they need to make the cut as to what ought to be included and what shouldn't be included.
Right, if they see no relevance, they can feel free to leave it out.
So do you want to do similar, you want to see something similar, that we did in the first part of our, review with the inventory? Is that, they have an overall, list. I mean, we can give them, so far we've given them everything that you've given me, in addition to anything that the public has provided to us. I just forward that on. Gabriel's got, comments, kind of a summary as well. We'll forward that on to them. We can ask them at that point, based on all of this, put together a new list of measures for us, and then go beyond that and tell us, one step further. What should we or should we not?
No, come back to us with their proposed
Well,
plan.
I'm suggesting not necessarily cut them out, but maybe identify them in the list, and then that can spark a discussion with you as to
Yeah,
the
if something's
relevance.
iffy.
Right.
I think, the next thing that we should see from the consultants is taking into account the comments that have been made.
Right,
This is what they think the plan should be.
right, based on your,
And, I've provided them with a lot of the provisions from the implementation agencies. I've suggested where they could go, which they can take or not take, because it's not, I'm not saying that this is, that the commission agrees with my placement of any of these, or that individual.
Gina's asking if in doubt, include it, asterisk it or something.
Sure.
So that we can say yay or nay to
Right,
it as a
right,
final
right.
item. Like if they see that they don't really see that there's value to it.
there's
but
no
they do
value in
see
this
that
measure.
Yeah,
Let's not get too wordy, let's leave it out.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
As Kelly has suggested, maybe there is a significant amount that are similar enough that we don't need to include them, the wording twice. Roll them into one, kind of a thing.
Roll them into one,
Right.
put a little footnote that
Right.
says.
And based on your comments, they might have some further suggestions
Right,
Yeah.
that we haven't even thought.
exactly.
And they have a copy of this list of the.
Plus, they've been working with,
implementation.
It-
Actually, I think I included it as an attachment to my.
I think that's probably where I got it, because I didn't remember going in myself and actually printing it. So I can certainly check with them to confirm that they have it. If they don't, I can get it to them.
Yeah.
But if it was an attachment in one of your earlier
Yeah,
comments, then yes, they do have it.
yeah, it was to my second set of comments.
also, they've been working with other jurisdictions during this period of time who hopefully are tormenting them in a similar manner and coming up with creative ideas.
We are unique
We're very unique.
in that.
Okay, so hopefully not, maybe. But hopefully that they're starting to see other opportunities, and hopefully all the jurisdictions are gonna benefit by this and they may have some new ideas and.
We
new
may
thoughts.
just be the example
We are the cutting
that
edge.
they're going to use
And that's what we should be.
for future plans in other rural counties.
That's great, if we are able to do that. Also, I'm sure that they're aware of Tuolumne because they're ahead of everybody with their plan. And, it's worth taking a look at it just to see how they managed everything. They're a similar county to us. So I think back to, do we need to have this on the agenda 2 weeks from now for further discussion? Or are we prepared to start sending things to the consultants and letting them? Gabriel, do you feel comfortable with us not having it on the agenda again? Or does anybody feel like we really need to talk about this one more time?
Madam Chair, I think we've had, this is our fourth meeting, if I'm not mistaken, on this subject. So I think we've been very thorough on this issue. And I think we have a marching orders, we know what we need to do, and we're going to move forward. And I think the next thing you're going to hear from us would be the consultants coming back with a more itemized list of GHG reduction plans, which we can then dissect and go from there. So.
Thank you.
Well, will the consultants, will the next thing the consultants provide be their best shot at the actual plan?
Yeah,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
Okay, right. And the background of how they determine their numbers, I think, for how we're going to.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, we're all
Because we know how
continue to
they
be
got these
hopeful.
numbers, and they were very impressive, I'll be honest with you. I hope they're more impressive next time.
So at our very first meeting where we did have members of the public online and prepared to comment on this, we had public comment on it, but we're going to open it for public comment one last time before we close this item for the time being. So I don't see any, yes, so I don't see any members of the public. Is there anyone online?
We have one phone number ending in 6588, and I'm not sure if that's Doug Carson or not, but we do have Lisa Medina and Doug Carson on Zoom. I don't know if you wanted to hear from them.
Sure, let's hear from anybody who would
So
like
maybe
to
we should
speak.
start with the phone number 6588 to see if that's Doug or if there's public comment.
Good morning, this is Lisa Medina, Environmental Management Agency. That is Doug Carson's line, but right now he is looking at a burn that's going on across our street, a prescribed burn. So he is busy doing that. So I just wanted to, just give my 2 cents on this whole topic. I think the discussion was great, and I just wanted to thank the commission for asking the EMA for their side of the story. And just wanted to let you know that EMA all across the board will be available to the commission at any time for any special requests or any education that you might be able to glean from our standpoint. Thank you.
But I just want to thank you for giving a bunch of facts that we were kind of fishing around for as far as how many people were in the CCWD services, wastewater systems, and that sort of thing. It was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
She got muted.
Whoop. Now we can't hear you. But you're smiling, so that's good.
Oh, okay, the host just asked me to unmute again. Were you able to hear me, my comments?
Yes.
We heard most of them.
Okay.
Just not the end.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on?
No.
Then we are going to close the public comment on this item. And I'm going to dig through my list to try to find my agenda, which I've buried. There it is. And we're done with this until you guys let us know when we're ready to have it back on the item, or on the agenda.
Well, at some point, I feel compelled to make some comments about this entire exercise, and now might be the time to do it, because we've now seen the inventory, we've seen what the consultants have come up with, we've gotten staff reports, and I've got some problems with this. And I'd like to lay them out, and maybe the board can do something with them or not. But number one, all of these proposals are going to cost money, which I don't think the county has, judging from the condition of the roads I have to drive. And the answer seems to be, well, we'll get grant money. So I think at some point this has to be clear that the ability to implement this depends upon getting funding. And, I guess I'm a little bothered by the notion that grant money is somehow just free money. Somebody's paying for it. And so I don't like to see it wasted, no matter who's paying for it. But I guess more fundamentally, I've got some serious doubts whether this proposed plan, when we get it, is going to be feasible or workable. Because the general plan is very specific. It requires that we establish a forecast of what the greenhouse gas emissions would be for all of the county in 2030 if only the current greenhouse gas measures continue in force. Then you have to calculate what reduction from that forecast would be needed to comply with AB 32 and SB 32 standards of 40% below 1990 emission levels. Then you have to add whatever additional greenhouse gas measures are necessary to accomplish reductions as of 2030 to no more than that amount. And these are all gross emissions, not net, not carbon sequestration, not taken into account. So the 1990 levels are going to have to come off the 2018 inventory, as to which I have already voiced in past meetings serious concerns. I mean, those numbers range from mostly gross estimates subject to unspecified margins of error, to completely bogus numbers. And the forecast of what the greenhouse gas emissions would be in 2030, if only current measures continue in force, has to come off the same 2018 numbers as well. And those are the two that we have to work with. Now, just on the latter point, for 2030, the forecasts also depend on whether you use business as usual or adjusted business as usual projections, and there's a huge swing between those two. The high is 387, 845 metric tons gross emissions by 2030, and the low is 296, 570. That's a difference of over 90,000 metric tons. That's over 30% swing just on which projection methodology you use. This is starting to look kind of funny to me, to tell the truth. Now, this all got its way into the CEQA mitigation measures, and because we were told they were required. They were actually included in the general plan before the draft plan went out to the consultants. And they never did make sense as mitigation for the 2019 general plan, but there they are. And it might be difficult to get out of them. So we're proceeding down this road for the moment. But this approach, which is gross emissions, consistent with AB 32 and SB 32, which we did not have to do, I think it's going to turn out to not be feasible at all. There's not much you can do with solid waste. That's 3.3% of emissions. Or agriculture. No feedlots, no dairies, no manure management to speak of. There's not much you can do. Or energy. Transportation is the big one, 66.6%. And the push there is to go electric, vehicles and bicycles. And I don't see how that's going to work very well. If you go to the Central Sierra Zero Emission Vehicle Readiness Plans, which is a very informative document, there are issues here. You have the difficulty in putting charging stations where there's no internet coverage and poor cellular service. We have a low population density, long travel distances, and mountainous terrain. Climbing hills requires more power, more charging stations, because the vehicle range diminishes when you're climbing. Cold weather makes the batteries less efficient. And at less than 40 degrees, there is a decrease of discharge performance. There aren't now and aren't expected to be in the next 5 or 10 years electric vehicles for heavy-duty work, firefighting, construction, police. And that might explain partly why the EV share in the 4-county area surrounding us in 2018 was 0.16%. There's going to be questions as to how does the county determine what are the percentage measures, like they have in TR 2 and 4. How are they going to get adapted? How's that going to fit into the 40% reduction below 1990 levels? Particularly since the 1990 levels have to come off the 2018 inventory levels, and they're going to be necessarily just as reliable as the inventory numbers, and so will the 2030 forecast. So I think the board should take a serious look at this whole program, especially if it's going to commit money to keep on going with it. It just might not be feasible. It's two basic reasons. It's the unreliable of the inventory and everything that drives off it, both the 1990 numbers and the 2030 numbers. There's a big swing as to which projection for 2030 you're going to pick. How is that going to be done? No matter how you do it, you know it's not going to be precise. And the heavy, almost exclusive reliance on electric vehicles for this county. I just don't think it's going to work.
I think we should keep in mind, and I share a lot of your concerns. I'm not saying, oh, this is perfect so far, it's going to be perfect the rest of the time. It's time for us to be doing what we can to reduce climate change. And whatever we accomplish in this process, even if the numbers don't add up or if the numbers don't make sense in every respect, it's something. We're doing something for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, and I think it's worth the efforts to get something done.
Nobody wants to hear me talk for a half an hour on this topic, but.
Please do.
No, we're going to get you guys out of here. I think it's an extraordinarily flawed process, but I think that it's still a very important goal. So I think we have to do our best to identify the things that can really make a difference for all of us now and in the future. And I'm less concerned about how the numbers calculate because I know that they're based on a flawed baseline. We're going to be projecting back and projecting forward from numbers we know are not accurate, and it just drove all of us to distraction. But it doesn't matter. We still have to find the items that can benefit us. And while grant money is not free money, it's still our money that went out, but that money went out to the state and feds anyway. And we might as well get back as much as we possibly can to benefit our community. And so if that means that we need to hire somebody to go out and look for that money so that we can actually do the things that matter and improve the lives of the people who live in Calaveras County, then we damn well better be doing it. And just saying that it's not a good process and we can't believe in any of it is not a reason to not leverage what we can right now to the benefit of the people of Calaveras. And that's that for me.
Well, I can tell you that I couldn't have written it any better for sure than you did, Kelly. You and I are on the exact same page. My whole issue is that they want it to be reduced by 40%, okay? 40% of what? Fake numbers? And another problem that I have with it, and it's probably the single biggest problem, is that everybody in the world is thinking the world is going to end based on these numbers. But is the world going to end based on the real numbers, okay? And people live in fear based on these numbers. That's the problem I have with it. And if we just go along with the program that they have out there, then we're all going to live in this fear of something that may not be real. Is the climate changing? Yeah. Has it changed in the past? Yeah. Was it similar to this in the past? Yeah. That's just the evolution of Earth and how things work. And the fact that people live in fear because of something that we as, humans are doing, and that's the whole reason for it. I don't believe that personally. I believe that we are having something to do with it. And for us to hold ourselves to 40%, that's my whole problem, is the 40% that we're being held to based on fake numbers. So it's impossible to deduce what the real numbers are in the way that they've done these studies. And I have no confidence that they're going to come back with any great improvements to what they already submitted to us, unfortunately. Maybe they were the wrong group. I would have loved to have been in on the negotiations when we hired these people, because I would have definitely would have liked to have held them to a higher standard than boilerplate that they hand out to everybody from a city to a rural area. So anyway, that's what I have to say about it.
I'm going to add one thing, that the place to make these is to go to the state hearings and talk to them and to the feds, because Calaveras County has no power to change what is required of us.
That's right.
So what we need to do is take it and turn it to our advantage and do the best by our own communities.
And push back a little bit when we know it's wrong.
Well, the 40% reduction is not a requirement on this county. That's a state standard. There is no requirement this county have a plan at all. And we were told that we had to have a plan, that it had to be consistent with AB 32 and SB 32, and that advice was just wrong. And that's what got us on this path.
I agree.
That's
with
why I'm
the
upset
state-
about it,
the
among
state-
other reasons.
The state standard is not required that the counties adopt the same standards. The state, however, is the sum of its wholes, of its parts, excuse me. And, you know, we're trying to do our part, that's all. But the state legislation does not say, and all counties shall adopt plans that will conform to this. I agree.
I have one more thing to add, off topic.
It's coming.
And it comes, no, it's off topic somewhat. July and the first week in August, I am not available from the 9th till the 9th of August due to summer camp. So I don't know if there's anything coming up in that area. I hope we get somebody to replace.
I was gonna say, it'd be great to have another commissioner.
Yeah, we need another commissioner because I have summer camp and I cannot be here. It's 28 days in a row that I'm going to be working.
So from July,
9th.
most of July. So
July
the
9th,
two meetings
From
in
July 9th to about the 9th of August, or the 7th of August, I'm not available.
Warren Commissioner reports.
I have a report. Would you like some good news? And you might have already seen this. But through
Thank you.
the efforts of Supervisor Garamendi, former Fire Chief Jeff Stone, and the people at CCWD, the Executive Director and the Operations Officer, there is now a new tank, water tank in Sheep Ranch next to the existing CCWD tank that is going to be devoted to fire fighting purposes, and it will contain eventually 127,000 gallons of water, and it's hooked up to a hydrant that will be available so that we hopefully will not have a recurrence of what happened during the Butte Fire when the water ran out for your Sheep Ranch. So this is good news, and good people doing good things. And it was funded by PG&E, the settlement funds, which of course we pay, but it's I think a marvelous recognition by the county that that was a priority, especially since Sheep Ranch is used as a staging area for other fire agencies during major fires, to stop a fire before it can go on.
Before it comes up my way.
Over the Murphys. Anyhow, that's my good news report.
That's great news.
Would my suspicion be correct that Commissioner Gladish had something to do with this?
I was kind of a fellow traveler in the project. I was part of a Zoom conversation. Yeah.
Well, we're seeing lots of great work on fuel reduction all over the counties. The Fire Safe Council folks have been doing a great job of getting funding and getting projects going, so
Yeah.
to add to that.
Well, that's another thing.
That is good news.
Got a grant for that, to reestablish the fire break that protected Sheep
Yeah.
Ranch during the Butte Fire.
Yes.
Other good news.
Planning Director, would you like to?
Well, I guess the question is, how much time do you have? So, what we were planning to do was for your next planning commission meeting to bring forward a draft oak woodlands ordinance, just for discussion, just for discussion purposes. It has nothing to do with any of the comments we've heard today, but it was something that, we wanted to show that we're actually making progress. So that, because I want to get your input into this before we go forward. There's certain aspects of it that you may like very well. There are certain aspects of it that you may not like at all. But what really makes an ordinance is a combination of ideas and suggestions, and maybe there are things I see that you don't see, and maybe there are things that you see that I don't see. So we're going to bring that over at the next planning commission meeting. It's not going to be as contentious as as a GHG reduction plan, and then we'll start working on landscaping ordinance and just basically getting the zoning code updated as we move along.
Dark sky.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So you asked last time if there were things that were priorities for us, and so one of the things that I think we should look at is the community plans that were eliminated during the general plan process for many good reasons. And I think Copper was told that they would be a priority. And so it'd be great to get that happening, but also, of course, Arnold and Murphy's lost stars in that process. And I think that our communities would be interested in creating new community plans. I know there's no money sitting around waiting to do this, but just if we could look at how we're going to get those back in the plan.
Very good. We'll take a look at it. Thank you.
And then the other thing is, we just did our housing element. It seemed like yesterday, but I think it was a couple years ago at least. So that's going to be coming back up, and I think there's just so much talk in the community about the issues of housing and short-term rentals that we should maybe start the process for gathering background information and figuring out, so that it doesn't all come down to one moment. It all goes by so fast.
Absolutely. I mean, Madam Chair, I think the fact of the matter is, whether we're rural or otherwise, there are certain mandates that we have when it comes to housing in the state of California. We don't generate enough housing. Definitely, that's true, because I'm still kind of trying to, trying to find a place. But at the same time, we need to do the best we can. And I was a little surprised, perhaps maybe naive, that when it comes to the issue of housing for the unhoused, there seems to be a significant, from what I heard, community backlash. And I don't really know what that is all about, because we have to start from somewhere.
So I think we have two big housing issues. We have the unhoused and the not in my backyard. But of course, we do want housing for people. And just the affordability and availability of worker housing right now. I would love to see a report on what has happened since the housing element was adopted, what progress, if any, we have made toward those, seeing as how I've been on many housing committees now, and I just feel like it's becoming more and more urgent, and that the community as a whole feels that it is more and more urgent. It's less theoretical than it used to be.
Well, I understand there's an issue with available housing taken up for vacation rentals, and thereby being unavailable for people who live here full-time and work. And perhaps that has to be looked at. As little as I like to suggest that people can't do what they want to do with the house they bought, at some point, you have to make some kind of a choice between being an adjunct vacation paradise for the Bay Area and Sacramento, or being a place where people can actually live here to do the work.
And I think there's a second piece to that, which is, for years now, it hasn't been economical for developers to build rental housing, apartments, duplexes, fourplexes. And I really think we need to put a lot of effort into, when we go through our zoning ordinance, looking for wherever there is an impediment to letting people do that. I'm not saying that we should go out and subsidize housing necessarily, although that might be necessary at some point. But for right now, just looking for ways to make it easier for people to do that and to encourage that. Because we talk a lot about, building housing that people can buy, but there are a lot of young people who are not ready to buy housing. They need to be able to rent something, and there's just nothing being built like that, and we don't have much. So
I agree. I think San Andreas, for example, of all places, being the seat of government, should have a variety of housing choices for those who, would come to work at the courthouse, for those who come to work for the county. It's affected our ability to attract some of the younger, fill some of the younger planner positions, because, they just can't find a place to live around here. So that's something that we're looking into.
I also think we could be looking at some more creative zoning, more flexible zoning that might allow for things like co-housing developments, or even places where tiny houses could be both permanently and temporarily, in a way that fits into the community as a whole. I just think we could accommodate a larger variety of lifestyles.
Absolutely.
So let's just, can we maybe keep this just a direction? We don't have an agenda.
I know. So we're just asking for things to be looked at, but I know we can't talk in detail about the solutions.
Wish list.
But I'm excited that the zoning's coming to us, and some opportunities to look at those.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm excited that we're open to possibly being able to do a little bit more development, because I've been wanting to do a little bit more at my place even, and it's been kind of frowned on, so.
Council's starting to shake. I think.
Are we ready to adjourn? Let's talk about that.
I'm
tormenting Julie.
Open minds, that's all. Open minds are good.
Thank you, everybody, for all your good humor and willingness to work with each other and stick with it for this long thing. And we're adjourned.